Om Namo Manjushriye, Namo Sushriye, Namo Uttamashriye, Soha. Om Namo Manjushriye, Namo Sushriye, Namo Uttamashriye, Soha.
We'll go live in just one moment. There's some technical difficulties on our end.
Good morning again, Rinpoche. Thank you so much for accepting our request.
Okay, chun.
Recording in progress.
Good morning again, Rinpoche. Tashidale. Thank you so much for these precious teachings. And Katrina, thank you for translating. Welcome to everybody online. A couple of announcements. Next week, the teaching will be on Tuesday instead of Monday. There's just a conflict with TBLC, so we'll switch to Tuesday. And then we have one class after that, the 25th, I believe. So we have 2 weeks left in this series of teachings with Geshe, and he plans to resume the teachings in December. In the meantime, you'll find information in the chat box about how to make an offering of gratitude for these precious teachings from Geshe and Katrina's translation and the Abbey for hosting. So you'll find that in the chat box, and we'll begin with some prayers.
To the teacher endowed, transcendent destroyer, one that's gone, foe destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one gone to bliss, nor of the world, supreme guide of being to be tamed. Teacher of gods and humans, to you the Buddha endowed, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then I bow. With pure bodies, form supremely fine, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain. Fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best supreme guide, to you I bow. With the supreme signs, fate like a spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not, incomparable wise one, to you I bow. Great compassionate protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, through the Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms. Unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path to freedom too, well established in the trainings. The holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble. A dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, foreland, sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you. May all beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamniryatayami. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
오야, 오야, 근데 가서 오 산제 좀 되는 도 자시로 발레로 시숨 메다 뜨게 된다라 시바감 숨세라 등감 숨감 숨이 감 숨시다 때 숨마도 요마로 코에넬이야 등감 세든데베 미다 냐와이다 던미다 돌라리 투투세요라 네 등감데 숨감데 삼데 당분이 벌써 시발을 써봐 삼대 중의시 줍차네 신에다 하동 tuk 삼대 중의시 줍네 네 라랑게 어디 땡이지 꼼냐 개고야라 순금 얘들 이 송미스도 송미기 의시야 꼼네 야 개고야 어디 감숨요라 능감 순금 소미가 어디 참마탐제게 내단 류단 로절을 써봐 참마데 수송미다 땡게 땡단다스 루부르도 그 진종비어래 네 루부르도야 지도에서래 선거라 딱 봤던 번 민주로 영원해요 말했어 세상에다 떠게 된다라서 어디가서 semli 남주네 샤고요라 소소네 류로줄을 서버가리네 배숨 서버가리네 대외 주장이 섬 땡도 땡게 지면섬 어디 땡고요라 티니 지마니 땡도 봐 시에내고 전도네 심리가 시봉감다 다티 참을 레서 제수 상감다 심부터 거 말아 야 어디 줄었네 시순메다 떠게 된다라서
So here to begin with, as the Buddha has stated in a sutra, sometimes translated as the Extensive Cosmic Sport Sutra, the three worlds or the three realms of samsara are impermanent as autumn clouds. So that's the first line of this verse. And really the three realms of samsara are exhaustive of all places within samsara. We have the desire, the material, and the immaterial realms. And so the desire realm contains all of the beings like hell beings, hungry ghosts, animals, humans, and gods. And the material realm contains those four concentrations, 1 through 4, the first, second, third, and fourth, that are attained by people who have attained those actual concentrations through developing a union of calm abiding and special insight. And then there are the more subtle levels of the immaterial realm and the various kinds of concentrations that are achieved there. And so all of this within the three realms of of samsara. The abodes, the bodies, the enjoyments are things that are impermanent. They kind of arise, they come about, and then they go. They don't stay long. They aren't stable or lasting. And this is something that we need to keep in mind, to hold in our minds, such that we don't cling to things as having some kind of permanence, particularly when it comes to the time of death. We will be able to face that without the same level of anxiety and trepidation, recognizing that this is just the nature of things. They are impermanent and fleeting.
Oh yeah. Then Joy Geshe Kala Tatan Sung Sung Dwa. Tela Nature Jiden Tela Nanging Dwa Simjen to Zerwa. And it's Teda Te Pumbulang, Yan Pumbu Torgu Yordo. Let an Yamu be Shawan the Cuba Sons and Social Rawan Kayomar. I think this Joy Geshe Kala Tatan Sung, Doka Tripum Genashi, Sungara, Doka Tram Genashi. Oh, condition. Kashetanda Milikete Yoto. Mijete ora yang lubu tu chiniko tendru rab tendre leptere tendru rete ora yang tendru ne kashe chini yang milike tenge yungura kashe nyawal ke tenge tendru ki lada lame ota tendre doa ritu tu kenge ke semjen tu zerwa kumbun dolin che ate ya kichi che ate doga traba navshi kabri mire kabri nyawar kabri tendru re kabri lare o din doga tramgede kanga trabgura me trap bo trap yoko trap kanga chachu trap kanga chura o dinashi pa samungone tambena tikanzu tsendi chibu samtang yo marwa chöse de kyonga mane range daagi kyundi ora chimala ba yuan dugu cheje kyo chiman bya yora da pumbuni ga kyu pe chen ga sore kuran kyundi chikpa kyube konen dra shora o tinti dra ki kala ta sus Doga Tamgana Shirese, or T Indico, Miliki Vinayata, Militato Tengi, Tendishing Gerichi, some Besamlet Tanjumera, or Tenising about the Chiku, Samsa, Tamatilichi, and some Tisam Corena, Nichima Penjek turned out to be some of the Kurgiora, or Tikosona, and it's Tipapaya that Kewatu at Ingiring Messina Yungura. Tisam Lumena and it Sindicania some Tandine, Tisam Koya Yomara, and Drake Kala Tadan Sons, ya teacher.
And then it continues the next line saying, the birth and death of beings resemble scenes in a play. So all of these beings who abide in the three realms of samsara, this is really referring to the way that they cast off, they take up various births and then cast those off under the control of karma and afflictions, thus revolving through these different sort of positions, like the way that players in an act, in a drama, would take on different guises and play different characters. So too, we sometimes are born as a human, and then maybe born as an animal, and then maybe born as a human, maybe born as a hell being, maybe then born as a hungry ghost. And so birth and death, it's sort of like as we cast off one body and then take up another, we recognize that sometimes we are human, but sometimes we are going to be born as other types of beings. So like in the kind of plays that they had in Tibet, I mean, the actors would take on all of the various different guises. So too, it's not just this kind of thinking allows us to go beyond thinking about just this life, that our continuum of the consciousness that we have right now came from previous lives, and we will go through multiple future lives. There isn't some sort of cutting off of that continuum. And so even if you have now been born as a human, you can recognize that this isn't going to last. This is not something that is stable, but rather I will have to die and potentially take on another rebirth, or will take on a rebirth that could potentially be in a negative state. And so this really compels us to do virtuous actions, to make an effort at accumulating virtue and purifying our negativities or eliminating those negativities. Because otherwise, if we don't contemplate the fact that we are going to have to die and move on, we can get so caught up in the affairs of this life. But recognizing how it is that we revolve, we cycle, we cast off one life and take up another, this really compels us to make an effort at doing virtue and abandoning non-virtue.
Oh yeah. Then Joy Syndrome Namge Londra de Sungudo. Chive Chosun Joy de Tanda Sambuchi Tayuna. Chive Chosu Pa Joy de Sungura. And ranking Nagipa Chive Torpa. Russia gre sungwara ngo tamje rangi trupchangine kon gyurashe ya do tengi sirete orno tende ko ro chendos chiwe choso pa ta nyeru nyeru roate namge lo na shin rangi ngangi pa yene ngangi jigdu gre se tandaro ro chendo namge lo da des teya ko chik teya rabe tende ke yo marwa keji yugi yugi ane be teya meba manjuri che ko teya meba ya rondo ba teya ko yach risarum babju shinto nyonjo ros risarune ma chuchin dugi ne ko rondo re ma to teya se ke yo mara o tina shingara zo sambu chen teya sambu teya zogi che chiwe choso ko be keji che ma debi che gyu de yo ara keji re ne che zogi dugi ara o risar babju shinto nyonjo ros ya o te chilo
So then the last two lines of this verse read that the transient lives of beings are like lightning in the sky, rushing by quickly like a fast-flowing mountain stream. So although we are alive right now, we have to recall death because this is something that we are naturally going toward death. Any compounded phenomena from the very moment of its inception is moving towards its destruction. It is something that our life is moving by moment by moment by moment. It doesn't remain at all. It's something as transience is sort of like a flash of lightning. It's here for a moment, but it's not going to remain. It's not something stable and reliable. And so too, it rushes by quickly like a fast-flowing mountain stream. This isn't something like a mountain stream is never stopping. It's constantly moving forward. So too, with each moment of our life, each moment we are sort of using that up. We are moving closer to the end of our life, toward our death. And so the life that we have right now is not something stable and lasting, but rather is subject to impermanence, moving every moment toward that inevitable end.
Oh yeah, what in do tanda ngarazu chede wa ni rama meba chese kon yoban to to yores chiwa meta pa tangwe tamje meta pa juan donge imbete shege wara ti shede ko shina ku yo mare to se ngarazu tangjin chida chene tangbu shede semle mede to so kirde yane yandu samltana tingo ne chiro ba kongu sumdu chubde achira tinde ko she ke yo mare shen pe ke yo mara o ti indu kar sore 대배 ring들 시고라 들랍지 karlang 그랬으나 전에 동계에서 침만 줘야 되려야 전에 레 개와다 메게 웹톱제네 침마게 디두니디 용고레스티 삼고요라 어디 인데자고 대과 방야다 개와 주야라 티 삼로티게 슈긴 대그래 디나신 낭민럽지 나다 거리나다 대대대대고 대외 추진 인삼 담마데 대외 추진 인삼 가가줘야 돼삼 어디 인데 대배 ring들라 야부제 전부다 제외권에 내내고래서 매체도 야부제 개고래서 샬라 처방 템버트 진리게 어디제 남미나다 샌다 아메리칸이나다 카톡도 그티체네 치마동게레스 티 삼을 코야 된다 시기와라 마도지 베트타도 땡게스도 삼을 코데니 테 삼을 코고 말도 어디든 다른 마도지로 메다보데 땡코야 돼 가도 이나 다가라 소소래가 쟁게르 비치네 다가라 롱바칠 신 소소래가 지나 다 디시다데 메티 삼래가 후다 보다 지그라 안겨봐 지그라 대대제 다와카시 지금마도 대매네 배댕갱 베선레체네 소소래가 제거야 된 경우 지금 말도 어딘데 된다를 송구하라 어디인데 갈소래 어딘데 감송가 가와이네라 ane ka sori kishila soba tezo rawa me bata thare ne kyo chima penche ki tidu ko ne chendela phusum soba rawa tikwa pa kyo tuya sulai ne chambata chebe ko ne deya dende chebe ne so chendela rang tebo chendela ti ki chulen do ra chuse de chendela te chulen do ra chendela te jude chambata chawa me bata tende ne ne 교심을 배제 대화도 용거라 푸스 펜바 시도 내가 대화 푸스 펜바 펜데 중에 상계지 템바를 묻히셔야 되거든 어디인데 삼르다네 네 첸딜이야 맞아 권에 님부 정계 봐도 랭고 그래 로 첸딜라 디기여게 치말라 펜도 여게 어디인데 샹라 소파 아니 펜바 트베 최대 트버차 대하더니 가서라 란치부 많이 봐 심지어 탐제력이 동해다 저와다 대화 토바치 통계기 상마 로 탑다 시럽 상보다 신의 상마 탈신배 간사진 유라차야 상계지 고반 토바차 냠네 아니 니리나 메지 개와 춘조지 주바이나 어디 상계지 고반 토베 규규시티 탈신바 규지상 뒷바 춘조지 빵바이나 티 용수 줘봐 자완에 빵야 탈신바 빵바 탈신바 규지상 삼을통 땅바이나 근데 상계지 고반 토베 이때는 사변샤기와라 사변샤기와라 네바샤기와라 뒤선다 근데 삼을 땅에 꺼내라 대답이네 탑대배 공부로도 이제배 아니 우마르지 처음에 갑서 뭐도 당내리 탑지기 탑 강가 송교라 어딜이야 태바다 삼바 공배림 진주 버샤 님도 공로세 때문에 셈버쇼서 텐디야
So, therefore, when we think about this, everything is changing without our having control over it. All compounded phenomena are impermanent. And teaching about death and impermanence is not intended just to scare us, although it might feel uncomfortable to think about at first because of our strong grasping at permanence. It is something that allows us to accept the kind of reality of the world. This isn't something that is taught just to elicit fear, but rather for us to come to recognize the actual nature of phenomena around us, that we ourselves are going to have to die, and that the things that we love, those around us, are also not things that we get to have forever. We are going to be separated from them. And as far as our future lives, our future is really dependent upon the kind of karma that we create, the actions that we engage in now. And so this really, when we recognize that we will have to separate from everything, this gives us an awareness of being heedful of karma, what kind of actions we are engaging in, and actually treating others without harming them, treating them with love and compassion in the present. So here, if we think that things will be as they are forever, this is problematic. We can't expect for all of the things around us and ourselves to have this kind of existence forever, but rather if we recognize their impermanence, we will sort of prioritize what is most important in terms of the work that we are doing. And really, this kind of recognition encourages us to make an effort to accumulate virtue and to abandon our negativities and to actually treat those around us with this kind of non-harm, non-violence, and really treat them with love and compassion. If we abide in the present in that way, having harmony and love toward others, then this is really something that will be of benefit to us now as well as in the future. As I often say, the Buddha Dharma, the precious Buddha's teachings, are the source of benefit and happiness, and that there's the temporary kind of happiness that we gain from the present when we treat others without harming them. When we treat them with love and compassion, we are more harmonious in the moment, as well as creating the kind of causes for experiencing benefit in the future. And so recognizing death and impermanence is something that pushes us to really think about our actions, how we are treating others in our daily life, and making an effort toward accumulating virtue and getting rid of our negativities. And when we come to see that it's not just us that's in this situation, but rather it is all sentient beings, and if we were able to be of benefit to them, how wonderful would that be? That by developing this kind of perfect method and developing wisdom, we would gain a state in which we are actually able to be of benefit to others. And so we should set this kind of motivation really in terms of listening to the Dharma here, but also in our daily life. When we do some small virtue, we should think, may this go toward the cause of bringing Buddhahood to culmination. That will become the seed of Buddhahood within us. When we eliminate some small fault, we should really think, may this go toward the cause of my being able to eliminate all faults and become a perfect Buddha. And so by doing that, we are able to really create create on a daily basis the kind of seeds. This is the method for developing those sorts of imprints that will lead to Buddhahood. And so here, in order to be able to reach such a state, we need to study the Dharma. And here, on this occasion, we are studying the precious Garland by the master Nagarjuna, and more particularly on this chapter, which is teaching individually the cause and results of higher rebirth and definite goodness. So we should set such a motivation, again, thinking that we are listening to this Dharma for the sake of being able to achieve that state of Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings.
자신들이었어. 어야, 다들 보셔. 당나도 되네 마저 쇼가 깨주들려도 되주된 거지. 어야. 다들 마셔야 돼 되셔도 개불이야. 아니 쇼로가 되네로 가서 깨주네 제제네 디바도래도 겨주네 저 개버도들 다음에 동반이 계시셔도 강사 다음에다 최지 다음에시 아니 방식도 강사 계시소네 동반이 셔서는 강사 다음에로 강사 만약에 풍불해서 버텨서 계시소네 셔서는 최지 다음에서로 최전에게 마도 각자들이 타락해서 요마로 최전 강사 다 풍불해서 버텨 되죠 강사 다음에 최지 다음에시거라 어디에 아버지 동반이 찍은 남사 고소나 저 강을 찍바로 바꿔서 셔는 마셔네 뒤고 셔담마다 르베 두지마다 셔그마도 고단데 찍바 고고라 저티 아버지 당분에 내버셔나 아니 샤만에 가져 주나 강가 하고 와서 르다와 때데 자신 비스고라 지다교지 다근 두신데 셰바티시 꿀을 차르샤송도 당부소소 다음에 봐서 소소를 자는 시에서는 아니 나의 풍부세라 저 아니 신 이동아 자니 소자 제로데 저 강갈 봐 다단 찍었다고라 되다 충분해서 이제 심고야라 어디에 야보체체 예고도 근데 단데 막 당부 간사 다음에 되셔도 되셔도 되나 막 지켜주는 길에 기부스 또 담아지도 슬라고는 무슨 거 다들 그래 야 다들 기부삼이 주만이 있어 때는 방어서 기부삼이 주만이 메밀로메 남가메 남시 많이 꾸면은 텔레션에 기부 강화세 어디 또던다 강사 소소 로 도메 마르 방아주 나오냐 벨로스기도 나오냐 벨로스도 지다요 말에 가sam비요 말에 다들 숨비요 말아 얘네 좀 아시도 라와지 삼고도 와가지고 나가라게 예 삼사체 각자체 다들 손좀 메라도 또 요르다 지다네 나 코란데 쟤네 각자인데 로가 매버서 코란 매버서 같은데 삼을당주데 케베선주에 요라 다단다 들이하고 각자티 여버시샤체체 파가에데 각자 근신스네메도 띠고요라 디카르고고스나 삼사 소소로 랭길이야 삼르나리 유두사 나데 소소 풍불할 때는 바닥 바참비 나이 삼비와 말에 나가라게 예 삼사게 딩에 속보로와 딩에 지지르세 아니 딩에 롱체자 인심도 나데 라와지 삼고요라 랑신지 주바 랑원에 주바 랑게 고에 주바 다 명망보요라 대도 안 같이 보라 대담바 주바 템바 주바 속tum도 주바셔라 따수도 주바셔라 제수도 주바셔라 랑도 주바셔라 어디 명망보요라 티엔데 땅보데 가래 가기요라 동반이스도 가래 동주요라 티디 아버지 다 쳐고야지요라 야 티지란나
So here then, where we are out in the text is picking up with verse 80. And these verses 80 through 100 of this first chapter are then going to be describing the two selflessnesses, that of the person and then that of other phenomena, the aggregates and so forth. And so here, apart from the basis that is characterized as being empty, there is no distinction in terms of the subtlety. So it's not as though the subtlety of the self selflessness of the person is different than that of the selflessness of phenomena, the object that is being negated is the same. And so if you understand the general presentation of emptiness, then this is something that you can then apply to all different phenomena. If you come to understand this in relation to the person, then you need to just deploy that same kind of logic in the context of other phenomena. It isn't as though there is a separate or different logic that needs to be applied in order to determine the selflessness of the person and the selflessness of other phenomena. So there is a quotation in which it says, in the way that you understand the self, or like the lack of a self of a person, so too apply that to all phenomena. We use, again, the same kind of logic and reasoning in order to establish this selflessness of either person or any other phenomena. And so since beginningless time, we have had this grasping at a self, this grasping at a person, particularly as being like autonomously existent or existent from its own side. Now here we need to sort of distinguish, there is that kind of grasping at a self when we have a clear kind of, it's mixed with the object of negation. When we sort of just have a sense of ourself in everyday kind of environment and doing various things, this part of it that is what is to be negated, the object of negation, might be as clear. But when we are able to identify it, it is this holding to a self that exists in and of itself, in its own right, that in this kind of like autonomous way, by its own essence. There are many different terms that are applied to this. So this kind of existence wherein it is able to bear scrutiny or bear analysis is something that is existent from its own side, having this kind of independence and autonomous nature. There are many names, but really when it comes down to it, we need to see this, we need to be able to identify that object of a negation. Now here, as it comes in verse 80, this is describing the selflessness of the person, and it says the person is not earth, not water, not fire, not wind, not space, not consciousness, and not all of them together. What person is there other than these? And this will then begin the discussion of the selflessness of the person.
Oh yeah. Oh, the Indian to Tambu Kunto Sade, Sanjay Sundo, Nalkawakawa Sundo, Tichik Kunchichegura.
Mm.
And it tell it out the Umabe Tawayana Gombulu da Dawata Wata, Pabala Sabatezuge, Shunji Kuntugura. Oh, the Netene Umabale in a Umarangi, but the thank you as a Logayoda. Oh, the Shunchi Kuntu Zetundati. Would a mother Shunglea Mandrini teaching the Yomara. No, Tidu Congombuluta, Sanjeta, Pawalata, Melo Casure, Dawata Walasoba, Shun to Yaboche, Tanitina Tindu Samsa Tichi Shunchi, the Delgora, Shunle Mandrini Chica Shesha, Chana, the Sheshan, Chana Damada, now Damada Shajora, Tomba Comsete, Tomba Conge Mamboyora, Su Tomba Congeore. Anika sort of Namshe Tomba Komtas, Nazu Sungam Ya Samde Tambuniba, Duta Su Kangakan Shita Tomba Samte Yora. Yando and Namshi Sumi Kamlinia, Namshi, Tutuya, Tau Tomba Mambu Komudua, Tomba Komne, so Suzuge, Kakcher, Tara Manu, Yamu Tara Manu, Kedo Yora, the Chiribale, young Biora, Nambale, young Biora. Yeah, teacher.
So here, it's important at the beginning to identify an authentic source, a source really in the teachings of the Buddha, a source in the sutras. And this is then the basis upon which we have this commentarial tradition of Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti and so forth. But there needs to be that kind of common base. Although we have different philosophical tenant schools, like the autonomists and the consequentialists and so forth, this needs to be something that is grounded in a kind of of textual tradition. It isn't something that is just kind of made up or one's own fabrication. And so here, this is, again, when we think about emptiness, there is, in the context of developing the various meditative concentrations and the absorptions of the immaterial realm, those kinds of meditations are based upon a union of calm abiding and special insight that is a particular kind of emptiness. They are negating or seeing, for example, the faults of form and the faults of various more coarse states of mind, and meditating on a sort of emptiness of that. They are refuting various things, but we need to recognize that not every term emptiness is necessarily referring to that which is the kind of Buddhist understanding of emptiness. And so having a tradition that is grounded in authentic scripture is something that is very important for being able to properly identify the object of negation.
Oh yeah. 어디 이제 뜻당도 가지고 너는 전에로 실제기 너값 송고도 대한 지대지 탄예지 왕게 인지 더 담반에 많이 넣었어요라. 뭐부터 좀 남샤시에도 강가 지대기 탄예지 따는 거부터 초벌에 시작하리다 들리미르를 따네. 아니 때때레 때마르 때레시 탄예시기요라. 저는 지대기 감사하라 tar바사하라. 뭐고 소우자테로를 잘해서 강걸 타녀요라. 어디 현다다 만으로서 소소 팀무 많이 봐. 내가 대신 게 저한테 챙겨려 미르르르 따셔요라. 근데 대저 강가데 이 많이 세된 지대게 타녀가라 소리 와서 잡아나 신체 지대게 타녀게 왕게 샤고요를 송거라. 어디 멤버체 뭐 코라게 왕게 주의 랑원에 주도바지요 말스. 그냥 지대게 타녀게 왕게 인지 더 담반에 많이 넣었어. 이 고랑게 원에 저 나다 생겼던 인세 로 나무 생겼던 인세 주랑원에 주두고나 아니데 타녀게 왕게 샤고요 말에 타녀 가르다 못하요 말에 고랑원에 주두고라. 산지대게 타녀게 왕게 인지 더 담반에 많이 넣었어. 아니데 수네 저 남견데 강가 매송고라. 실제긴 되어가서 소메타메세 때 당부들한지 대기 타녀 요청 담반 마이너스 ene namba tamje chimba sanje ji parto kanga ya re shane tarwata tamje chimba tsama me singudwa o tinashi shiro nimbu kapso gazo kasore shu tamje rangshin ji tomba namba yanda bo cheso taose singudwa tambudela shu tamje rangshin ji tomba namba yanda bo cheso taose ene so me dame me kanga me singudwa tindeke chago mene shu kanga me ta me kanga me singudela rangshin da 타녀 경화기 샤과인다 tinda게 송고 마라 요다 사로로 와치다네 가야이나 니 가게 요 마레스 송샤데라 니 가게 요 마레스 베제 송고 마레 가게 메나 송게 요 마레 송바보 요 마레 가사 요 마레 공게 요 마레 니 송고에자 요 마라 어디 인데고 각자데 대한직단지 타녀 왕기 샤과인지 단단반에 많이 넣어서라 랑신게 tomba namba yanda ba cheso tawose ta tende do kanga na mambu yora o de chi sungya.
So here, as it says in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, that all phenomena are posited by the power of convention, by the power of our labels or conventions, but they don't have ultimate or inherent existence. And so here, this is a really important concept to understand. What is being said here is that everything within this world, like from this worldly realm to liberation, sound, sights, sounds, smells, taste, touch, and so forth, all of this is established, is existent by the power of convention. By putting labels on various functions, we determine, oh, this is that, and we give it that kind of a label, but they aren't established from their own side, in their own right. So if it were the case that the objects existed from their own side or within their own right, then the name, the label would have to sort of just appear there. The self would be the self from its own side, or like blue would just be blue without our giving it that kind of a label. But it doesn't, but nothing exists in that way. Whether we are talking about form, sound, smell, taste, touch, all the way through omniscience, all of these phenomena, as it explains here within the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, don't exist inherently or from their own side, but rather exist by the power of convention. And so here we need to understand this, as it explains in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. We have the line that says that we should see perfectly that all phenomena are empty of inherent existence. And then it proceeds to say there is no form, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch. If we don't understand that properly, that this is referring to a particular kind of inherent existence or existence in and of itself, then there is the danger of thinking that this means that they are utterly non-existent. And so therefore, if it were the case that these things were utterly non-existent, then who would be the person teaching about it? Who would be the person listening to it? There would be no need to teach of any of this if it were the case that there was just utter non-existence. And so we need to understand how it is that this, as this is explained in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, that all phenomena, although they lack that inherent existence, they exist by means of convention. However, they don't have that kind of ultimate or existence in and of themselves as they appear to us.
Oh yeah. 뭐 전에 공부를 주게 쇼만 변할 때 용도다. 그 자시르게 차셔기나 관계 떼진 해버린 좀 그러 말. 떼진 좀 떼진 해버린 좀 아까 되네 동반이도 셔셔라. 되네 떼네 다고한테 되니 오메라미 노세. 땡제데 배 만부 송게 와라. 저 처음에나려 땡제데 만부서. 동반이 주위에 주신 소원들부터 다루도 서대 땡제를 두고도 와. 자 망부질을 뜨진 렐네는 뭐보라한테 뭐지 당에 따네 샤고 그러면도 망부 뜨진 렐 메고네 코라 랑원에 랑게 투버 랑주 투버치 랑게 뭐에서 요데베서 요 말이 대선자 그 땡제데 계신 붙여서 거도 땡제 데버를 좋아 가세 되니 동반이 되셔 담부 기도이네 뭐보이네 기도이네 교단께 망부질 소원에 이 로버도 제초운데고 규진고 왕이야 두고 얼마도 랑원에 수트베시 와마라 티나시 좁상게 어디 파다도 차셔다 닥시 망부질 때네 아니 대강바레 대체제레스 파 따고라 자 따서들고 차 망부질 뜻인데 파치 따고도 와 어디도 땡진 레버는 종아가 땡제 닥시 뜻다 땡제 대단 rel네 아니 뭐 가르 통했다기나 디샤고 얼마도 대수다 만들자 코라치 수전자 수제랑은 주에시와 말해서 거라 땡제 레버 종아가스 테네 동반이도 셔야지 땡제 레버 테네 동반이 테네 따보다는 매르베스 오 매마르라서로 테네 테네 따보삼라 땡제 마부 덕시 차셔 마부 초네 텔레아파 민지다네 당예제 왕게 파샤위어레스 코랑외네 수직 숙tuk도 랑신게 랑게 라와제는 코랑 수주베시와 말해서 거라 어디지랑야
So here, there are many different quotations that establish this, including from Nagarjuna's fundamental verses on the middle way, where he emphasizes, where he says that whatever is dependently originated, that is explained as empty, as emptiness, and that which is dependently designated, this is the middle way. So really, in teaching about emptiness, this all goes back to dependent origination. Dependent origination is seen as extremely important because for all phenomena from their very inception, from their production, don't exist from their own side, but rather they are designated, they are dependently designated on the basis of a collection of parts, on a collection of causes and conditions, dependent upon the basis of designation and the mind which is designating that. Other than that kind of interdependent origination, there is no thing, no phenomena that is existing in and of itself, in its own right, apart or sort of independent of its various parts, the various causes and conditions that led to its arising, or are dependently designating it. So again, whatever is dependently originated, that is explained as emptiness, as not having that kind of inherent existence. But if we then think that, well, oh, does that mean that phenomena are utterly non-existent? Well, no, that which is dependently designated is the middle way, in that it isn't that phenomena are utterly non-existent, but rather on the aggregation of the various parts that compose a basis of designation. There are the various causes and conditions and parts and so forth. We dependently designate. We say, oh, this is that. So it isn't that phenomena lack existence entirely, but that they are not existent, again, in the way that they appear to us, with that kind of autonomous existence from their own side.
Oh yeah. 뭐 제가 그래서 어떤 네 박발하고 쇼나요도 쉽게 반나려고 도 되게 라와 매바데 테나 따네 요 마이스 추탐제 다메세 다데 송거라 추탐제 다스도 간사 집을 고지와 마라 추탐제 그 당니서라 랑 당니 강배 당니 수기 당니 자의 당니 랑 고오셔라 제 송거라 추탐제 다메 바서 랑 고오데 라와도 주바시오 마레세 랑원에 주바시오 마레세 텔 다메 바서라 네 간사 그때도 샤네 간사 다메 간사 마이베 추토저 그때도 추기 다메시기도 전디고 라와 메바데 테나 다네 요 마이 소레 추탐제 다메 도시베 다데 라와메 당니기 추가야 요 마레서 거라 데고 라와 메바데 테나 단도메 오티카도 인데바 나와 다바 시게벤 데바 요라 오 지나레티 요요바 어서든다 텔라 다지 차와네 세더라 딘 데바데다 단다 바발라 시게벤 디치드긴 데바라 텔라 다지 차와네서 다메서 다디소라 텔라 다지 차와네 간싱오브 남지샬라 랑말레베 모랑시데사 시게벤난 데고 라와메바데서 소소 테네다니 에메스타딘 데바자고라 텔라 다지 차와네 간싱오브 남지샬라 랑말레베 모랑시데사 테메보네 다메보서 랑메 당니도 메바텔레 다메보세레서 대한 초다 간사기 남반이 소데니 간사 담에 치기 담에 보서 거도 야 되지려나
So here, another quotation to support this is from the Master Aryadeva's 400 verses. And so here he has a line that says that when we talk about the self, and here when we are saying self, this is not something that is solely applicable to persons, but rather is the sort of nature, the essence of something. And so such a self in the context of selflessness means that kind of autonomous, independent existence from its own side. And so to lack such independent existence is to be selfless. And so therefore, here, when we are talking about selflessness, this can be applied to the person and to phenomena. And actually what is being negated in terms of that self or that essence is this sort of autonomous existence. And Chandrakirti further glosses this in his commentary to Aryadeva's 400 verses, where he says that here, the self, as is being described here, is a kind of nature that is not dependent upon anything else, that has its kind of existence in and of itself without having to be dependent or reliant upon any other phenomena. And the lack of that kind of existence, or that sort of nature, essence of both phenomena and persons, is then the twofold selflessness of that of persons and phenomena. So here, this is the kind of part of the source material for this, Aryadeva's 400 verses, where he explains that self is this kind of autonomous existence, and the lack of that then is selflessness. And Chandrakirti further explicates that in his commentary to this, basically explaining that the self that we're talking about is some sort of nature that isn't dependent or contingent upon other phenomena.
Oh yeah, or tate kado Shenla Rama Lebe Ngo Rang Shinti, Te Meba Ne Da Meba Sungdwa, Digo Rama Meba De Se. Te Rama Me, Shenla Rama Leba Yobatele Rama Do Yobase. Te Shenla Rama Leba Shibe Shente Karil Sigre, Chitonga Ba Lamri Lado Chimina Reshe Jagdwa. Tela Shenla Rama Leba Sheba Ne, Kujin Shenla Rama Leba Le Sewa Minji Sewara. Te Chene Kujin Shenla Rama Leba Sene, Ragbari Dura. Kale kabu ke me do sama haku ra chi te ne gyuden ken le te ni de bu ke da haku do ma sa kyujin shan la ra ma le bala sa ma re se ne kare le sa re se na tanye be she bala de re se che ta chan de be she ba cho ra dai tanye da lo yi tanye si ni yo ra dai tanye su de ming ta e de ra lo yi tanye su tang bu sam de le ming kar ta do ta ne pa o ti pomba se sho ti ka wa se sho sam loy tanyara ani chema di kaware di pumbaran di mere si che loy tanyara sa tanyebe sheba telan chi dengi tanyebe sheba telya shen sigre se te wa ge shagba mebe yoba tela ni rawa du yoba sigre se tela ka sere shen shi sheba ni jujin shen la rama le bole so men ge se judenbe tanyebe sheba le shen shi chala te wa ge shagba mebe yoba la ni rawa du yoba sigara Tagi nga zun donal chi do swa, tian chi dengi tanya ki wangi yingi se. Tian tamba ne mayin no sungda, o tina shi. Chi denbe tanya be shebe wangi shakwa mayin ba, yu korang ngune su yoba ina, ane rawa tu yoba se gora. An chi denbe tanya be sheba ki dakshi ta chashe mambu chi la teo ne, ane ti tumu de lega chingi chi pa ming chi ta sha te, te chi dengi tanya ki wangi shara. Mambu chi tsoba dakshi la teni pa tak yordo. Ti sungda, tindigdwa shenla rama leba shebe shende, gyujin shenla rama leba sene, ane rakbarba sangba hako togdo tongba yi. Ti marasa, tanya be sheba la shen shisha, ti onge shaba mimbe, ane yoba tila rama to yoba sigre sungda, ya ti chilana.
So here again, continuing with this, Arya Deva has said that this self, in the context of selflessness, is this kind of autonomous existence. And then Chandrakirti further glosses that to say that this is referring to kind of existence which is not dependent or contingent on another. And so then here we get to the commentary by Jelama Tsongkhapa in his section of the Great Stages of the Path, dealing with special insight, in which he explains that this is not just referring to, like, when it says it's not something that is not dependent upon another, that other isn't just referring to causes and conditions. It isn't as though the autonomous existence that is being negated or denied is the kind of autonomous existence that is a kind of independence from solely causes and conditions. That is a more coarse kind of understanding, but rather as it is explicated in that sutra quotation, this really has to do with more subtle levels of the fact that phenomena are posited by designating conventions. And so here, when we say convention, we can be talking about the word, the like sound that we give as a name to phenomena, but also the thought, that designating mind, the kind of mental picture that we have of things, where we say, oh, this is this, and so forth. And so to have this kind of autonomous existence is to have an existence which is not dependent on not only causes and conditions, but also this process of designating with a basis of designation and a mind that designates with convention. And so here, this is the kind of more subtle level. I mean, to a certain extent, everybody can understand that phenomena, particularly conditioned phenomena, depend upon causes and conditions. But in terms of the sort of autonomous existence that is being referred to in that that Arya Deva quote and the Chandrakirti commentary to it, and then here the Jelama Tsongkhapa commentary, is really referring to an autonomous existence that is independent of designating conventions. And so as we go back to this quotation from the Prajnaparamita Sutras, where it says that all phenomena exist due to the power of convention, they don't have some kind of autonomous existence existence. This is really getting at that same idea that it's not just dependency upon causes and conditions that is being highlighted with the sense of this dependently designated, but it is that dependence upon the conventions, those labeling conventions and that kind of process, and that the phenomenon, both persons and phenomena, don't have a kind of existence independent of that.
Oh yeah, thank you. 개발을 손주 메라메라마 보여대. 인도가 소래. 세rum 부치다 소야데. 그 우마 축세다. 우마 죽바랑제다. 단도도 시야치 송거라. 뒤손도 개발하셔게 뒤손도 와. 가소래. 다 동반이데 단다 세rum 부치다 뜻을 소샤베. 동이 참모데 말에세. 라. 동이 참모 말에 틀에 타와티. 现在的公布这什么不要了？看到东北人说的开不开销样的，装不熟的，搞熟的，我这种个把到我的搞熟的，到我这个下是，到我这个当我们路行动做下是呢，我们路熊仓嘛的。तावा थर्दू टेम्बा मारेस तावा शिरपता छिक्से ता तसु कांगा थर्दू तावा तेगी ओ मारेस ते तसु तावा थर्दू टेम्बा शो माइसे ते सोजो योरा ते ताना कारेस गोम्बुलु दु तसो कासु टेम्बे 동이 참모 तसु 때 동이 참모 내레세 디마도 तावा शिरपता तसु कमने टेम्बा데 동이 타슈데 마레 텔레 타와 요레세 ते सोजो 제 요라 야, 뒤질렀나?
So here, when it comes to emptiness, there are different sort of ways of teaching about this. And here, when we look at the entry to the middle way, Chandrakirti's text, his own auto-commentary to that, as well as Jilama Tsongkhapa's commentary to Chandrakirti, some assert that this is not a description of the most subtle kind of emptiness. They would say that there is a more subtle version of emptiness that isn't taught there. So this is a kind of, again, a position that would take that the sort of intent that is brought forth in Chandrakirti's entry to the middle way, as well as his own auto-commentary, and then the commentary by Jilama Tsongkhapa, really even looking at the kinds of texts of Nagarjuna on which those are based, things like his fundamental verses on the middle way, and so forth. There are those who would say that that hasn't taught the final intent of the Buddha, or the final kind of meaning of emptiness, but rather you have to look at the collections of praises that are given by Nagarjuna to see where he taught the final kind of intent of emptiness. So again, this is getting at the kind of discrepancies that there are in what is accepted as the final presentation of emptiness.
Oh yeah. 그래서 그 나라에 뒤따기 시계바다 대전하는 순번나시에 잡을 순주 요래 롱지 장내 보이지래 로 린지델렌 데버 떠봐서 공부를 주제라 지델렌 데버 떠be 나올시요도 아니 때까지로서는 땡진 데버를 강조와서 땡진 데버를 때는 좋아 강에 받대서야 땡진 데버를 강조와 등이 주제 동벌시스 산제게는 땡진 데버를 좋아 강에 받대 동반이 소샤스거라 등이 저기 동바시 다 동바데 가르스나 뭐보 라와 유명시 뭐보 라와 유명시 뭐보 라와 유명시 생계다에서 저라 뭐보 라와 유명시 아니 가서래 생계 뭐보 라와 유명시 아니 가래 뭐보 라와 유명시 냠메 교제 생계다 오라 뭐보 라와 유명시 냠메 교제 생계다 직배 매버 송버레스 당어보 마와다 치르바다 가고보 랑원네 투바요레 랑시 투바요레 송게시시라 어저졸야네 산제게 직배 매버 시나 매버 라 랑원네 투바 랑와드 투바 ngobiyo 마레스 송샤세라 어진데고 지델레 데베 뜨바나리오도 땡제 데버가 강쇼와 딩이 쳐지 동버시스 ngobo rawa yo meshi nyame chuji senge tes o te ja te sonali te yora rawa to tuba yo marese tenje debar jo kan yebate tongba ni resera eni kan tongba resena ngobo rawa yo meshi nyame chuji sanjer sigora nyame chu senge te jikpa meba o te shane diga yusam jikpa meba ngobo ne chungune yimbara o tinde songdo o te chilamna digdo
So here, as a response to that, though, to give a quotation from one of the kind of praises, and again, there are various collections of praises composed by Nagarjuna, but in one that I'll just say as the praise of the transcendent, or that which goes beyond the world, there is this same idea as we have been discussing. So here again, it says basically that whatever is dependently originated, that is taught to be emptiness. And what does that mean in terms of emptiness? It is having this kind of lack of autonomy. There is no autonomous or independent sort of existence. And so you, incomparable one, have proclaimed this lion's roar. So here, when it comes to the kinds of lower tenant schools, like those including the realists and so forth, they would say that there has to be sort of some existence from its own side, some kind of inherent existence for there to be existence at all. But here, as opposed to accepting such a proposition, as the Buddha has taught, that whatever is dependently originated, that is empty. And what does it mean to be empty, really, is to have no autonomy, to not have that kind of autonomous, independent existence. And so here, this is establishing that phenomena are not existent in the way that those lower tenant schools might assert. And this is something that the Buddha, the incomparable speaker, has proclaimed as like a lion's roar, in the way that there is no fear or trepidation, because this accords with actual reality.
Oh yeah. Oh, that and that is Sonju Mambuyo, the Tezusama, the years of Mene Uyora. They are Sonju Sama de Temata said, they go to Pajo de Sujo de Demudu, Sujo de Pajo de Mudeco, regret Taxayora. In a social Tawakari Lukunto Nukumbina, the Anyamu Shiva, the Pendo Meva, the Tendicere Mara, Tombakaje Komna, Yamushia, the Tanzishia, the Chung Chudre, Chadan Yamuchung Chudre, the Kangaku Yungura. 그 바셰도서 소수 줍지디 셰그라 디메 줍지디 에세 파조디 드무디 셰르즈 거라 이마에서 내 삼주제는 데데 공디 데르반디 에세라 파조디 체네 데드무디 세르즈도 요라 어쨌든 요고 그래도 그 르베 산제 좀 되게 딱지 지송고요 결론 다감 개남게 세제대 세신도 요소 따라가야가 라르자에 구실면세 라르자에 매밤 셰기 개바 중매자세 딱지 지송에 대 소소를 받게고 와도 네 강가를 구주다 단다 예버시 단다 요와 어디인데 소소를 가르 겁나 그는 남배쪽다 마이네 심잠배 따와지 셰를 공자 더도 우마랑기 바이나 랑기베 셰라 대다 대신이다 근데시 전에 야 어디서 야 요나
So here, when it comes to these different kinds of explanations, we see that there are different ways of speaking about emptiness, and something that is accepted as reasonable, as viable according to one school, might not be accepted as reasonable by another. So there is a kind of internal debate, but we should recognize that the sort of purpose, I mean, when we engage in learning these various tenet schools, it is for the purpose of being able to eliminate the afflictions. And so here, when it comes to, we shouldn't just sort of accept it as like, well, this is what my school says, and so this is what the view is. But as the Buddha has repeatedly stated, we have to actually investigate for ourselves in the same way that we would investigate gold by cutting and rubbing and burnishing it and so forth. You need to use your own kind of logic and investigation in order to really determine what the meaning is. And here, the purpose of that ultimately is to be able to eliminate those kinds of afflictions. And so that's why emptiness is being taught at all.
Oh yeah. No, didn't 되더라. 저더니 아디 뭐 대체 시나 야부 그래. 가서래. 나도 자시를 값서 요것도 뭐블로도 최초들 관계 땡진 레버를 좀세. 뒤가서 땡디데 야 대체 무시라지 송고도. 저 땡디데 치 땡진 레네 초벌 때는 내가 챙겨지 요래서 뒤 고였던다라. 땡진 레버죠. 관계 땡진 레버를 좀 각과 매봐서 지당 각과들어. 각과 매봐 깨매봐 채봐 매봐 딱 매봐 오와 매봐 로 매봐 타데 되면 되지 매 저번 일시세 저번 일시와서 어디디 동반이 참 송구요라 저 저번 일시세 디 오야 개박 것이 손주 됩니다 또 동이 매가서 돼 셔나 디드면 도세 단다 지중가 봐도 저 동이 매가서 거라 매가 어떤다 한tel 가보자는 개박하시 손에 매가 시대 전주 시고 말에 라조 생생다 진짜지요 말이지 좀 거서래 수고요 되네시 메가스도 가서래 가셔대 봐 가점들이야 메가스거라 수주에시 메가시 가셔 가점게 동바들라 저번 여시와 하시나 동바 라 어딜이야 메가스 디 각바디 코들로 벨레데시 기날 조금 바나리 아보고도 메가스에 가르치는 가셔 봐 가고 참마도 수주에게 매버들 메가시그레스 가자지 바카네 수주바시 션다시 수주에는 많이 가셔라 야 어디인데 근데 소주에 와데 인도 메가카리 많이가 카리를 숨기 어떠서 그 딱자신이 쉐고요 어디지라 아니 되라
So here talking about the sort of again, I think this would be helpful to quote again from the praise, the beginning homage at the beginning of Nagarjuna's fundamental verses on the middle way. He talks about that which is dependently originated. For that, there is no cessation, no arising, no coming, no going, no permanence, no annihilation, not one. Not sort of unitariness and not multiplicity, but rather this is the stilling of all. The stilling of all elaborations, perfect peace, referring to this emptiness. And so here, emptiness in this, in the context of, as it is explained by Nagarjuna, Nagarjuna and then Tsongkhapa as well, is asserted to be this non-affirming negation. Now, this is something that is debated over by various scholars. So when it comes to the kind of understanding of the Prasangika school, they would say that this sort of the stilling of all elaborations or the pacification of all elaborations, they're referring to emptiness, is referring to this kind of a non-affirming negation, which, as is described by Baba Viveka in his Blaze of Reasoning, is a kind of negation where you have merely negated something, but you have not established something in return. Now, some would assert that that is problematic, that you can't have emptiness be a non-affirming negation, whereas others would say that that is actually the most reasonable sort of an answer. So here we can see how it is that various scholars interpret differently the same kind of passages in accordance with their particular views.
오야 반대서 당한테 솔로가 교수들이다 강사가 미시기 어라선다 너 기부 그러니까도 기부 삼이 추마에 메메롱메 남가메 남시 마이 꾸메나 텔레션에 기부 강화성고도 다 강사가 미시도 강사들 제기 어라 강사들 소소들 다 소소 파자들 다다여라 나 남주 소소고 삼대 나데 컨디션 삼대 나 스도 라와데 삼고도 풍부라 뜻은 될 메고 바치라 소보다 샘다 소와도 줄은 될 메고 바치 도줄왕 경계의 소보로왕 경계의 소르비치 고나 랑주 통계 라와 통계를 지삼 고고도 마도 지금 풍부다 샘다 류다 뜻수 강가를 뜻은 될네 ene mingta shanke shi in samsa samro chingmdo o te sambi yoba mare sanga ngarang ye samsa chi samro khogdo 어디 요마 디 요나서 다 째네 가봐요 세기 와라 딱던 째세라 들이야 랑위네 요나 랑와도 투바치 요나 라 나라도 삼부샤는 강가랑 그 요새 소리도 기케랑 요네 가기 임바다 계란 라바 강바 데 강디네 지속바도 남자도 박바다 샤다 기바다 망부여 저저네 레레레 말아 에 텔레션치 계란 베티다 bedloga ngobo sebuneshi tapanganeshi tade loga chiwar besene trecegi wara no yana sem derbe yana choa derbe yana dushi derbe se tinde chegi wara tsedu intinane ingeci rag marwa takton sesira deshe takbe tonda de rangwine yona ta tsene ni ju wara taksu du tuba sigdo takje chen dire si chi ra yo ko wara taksu du tuba chesu du tuba se ro rangwine yona ta taksu chesu du tugu yore chita yona taksu chesu ge tugu yo mare kotene takba samado dire se ra yi jingwene tsene ra ye ke yo ko marwa tene namdu ra chashane ta ngema ene shingda du pe chagra ta tesa namdu da ne de kambutra ta te dam da pe lega chenge do no to jena li kyupche pe mangbo yara dakshi pe mangbo yarda namdu purge se namdu babsu se ro ya namdu kyan sho sha se ro che mangbo do ta tena machine dakshi pe mangbo yara lega chenge tezu changma gi lega chene ni ya ko 미티게 samruta ya kya ni ya do namdu persons ta namdu ma babsons namdu chala ta da chili kyashne namdu kyasho shasera tide ko ti kyanjan namdu ke marwa ta ti chibudu marwa tina tele kyasho namdu kyasho shasera ni imba shi chashagu do tinde tezu kangala tejen relne ani lega chig chigi yore kanga chogwa ke chene te chide zanda namdu persons tene ta bocha dakshila tene ne pa le pa ta ne ta namdu pure te namdu de ta se te computer de ta se te chi de ta se te lega te de te chi de ta se tanya chi do ta tena na rawand to ba chi ne tena na ta kar se chi ta yor te yo maro ta da re me de re maro kolo de re chilo pa pa de re te maro chilo pa pa de me na ya pur tu maro la ba kin du jure has to le na ko ti ko bu yara 근데 그 정말 초과가 땡진 걸네 애니 자와제버지 시용기도 하고 호텔에 안에 차오래 자지 따가리 샤고래 참에 근데 니에 그 요구 말해서 콜레가 챙겨지 주고도 와 어때 손자 그 땡진 레버를 좋아라 자지 롱그레 세티라 땡진 레버 망부질 땡진 레네 질 자와치도네 되게 자와제버에서 강사 자와제버 샤고도 와 근데 그 다들 세게 왔다 난다 다데 소소데 랑와도 주바치요나 다스바 제스바 케랑 남주 삼바나 신디요 나시고라 네다 가데에서 소보게 강디네 지죽바도 야제기요라 강베미네 제제로와 샤다 박바다 규바다 아니 차다 추세다 루고다 망부요라 탁베 차들라 사인 중앙서고라 탁베 차들야 넘바 추세다 차도줄야 추인 중앙서고라 저들이야 매일 중앙에서라 기부사 매일 주말에서 상원에 말다 길로사 지금 말에 답변에 저는 사실 대버들 사실이라 탁버리들 사실이라 뒤에 탁버리들 사실 아니 렘바타다 추시대요 하고 렌시 렘베스더라 기부사 매일세 사이 중앙 ruba다 탁버 차도 좀 말해서라 기부사 매 주말에서 나로게 타다 추시라서 버텨서 말해서라 주섬춤에 매매에서 롱비차 말에 저기 차시와라 저도 맨날 아니 밑에기 오마라 동도라 저기 차대 구겨라 선부치대야 삼미춤에 매매에서 롱매에서 운중을라서 봐 우파단 수단 제대 구겨라 롱 기부 삼미춤에 매매 롱매 남카면서 동산대 구겨라 우당 고요를 나올라도 짜나 신짜나니 콘줄래가 제라고 말어 동바 고요라 강가 우당서 거래 대체서 거릉도 닝도 구조자서 거라 이또 부가 남과시기도 하텔 남과시도 칠로 남과 딱 받을 수요 마다 동상게 차대 내고 이간에서 부가 남과시기라 어쩌죠 우당에다 대서 고요라 짜게 소리지네 내가 우당서라고 말어 그 우마다니 대로식 말아. 그래서 다 마부질 뜻은 저기도 와. 대신에 레레 제기 와라. 다들 메동나 안에 다 가만도 오세요 와라. 다 찔리 두고 주서 메도세 아니 가래서 어때서 관계 내가 전에 밑에 공부 좀 로선 다 로스 세우라. 락발 좀 말해서 다 마셔 세우라. 락반에 제 창시 대신에 어디 뜻이래서 뜻이 들려서 락반에 주지 되라 뜻이 들려서 락반 뜻 투라. 락반에 그 말아. 오늘서는 다이네 그 다가 샤고도 땡지 레버를 좋아서 다가 샤고도 차 샤고도 어디 인정가 뭐 간대지나 차셰암 닥시 찍버리스 차셰다 닥시 망보질 때네 내려 봐지 딱 그래 이때 거저 하루 버리서 내가 생겼어요 텔이야 다가 샤고로 다 누구도 다 내기도 다 내기도 다 개와셔서 다 띠버셔서 그 메시지 강가 타냐 샤고로 뜻이라 땡지 레버를 좋아서 단단단들 간사 담배셔라 기부삼에 추마이 메메롱메 남감메스 남시 마이 꾸메 나서 셰바 세시르 바데 다마레스고라 티치부다르고 마레 남시 마이 꾸메 나서도 때도 강가 촉바스나 뒤에 다르고 마레 풍부가 촉바서라 양라도 강가 촉나 심대르비네 양라 강가 뿡샤는 그 강가 촉되어데 티게 레가 지금 말와 촉바데 낚시되더라 촉발을 때는 봐 따기 와라. 자, 그 낚시대다 때는 따생인데 가가야 되더래. 촉발 고란데 이나니 촉발을 때는 봐 따고 말아. 촉발이 들으셔서 그래. 될 때는 따고 되는 거 말아. 그치도 리소하세. 남시 많이 꾸면은 될 시에나 기부 가서 촉발돼야 말해서. 다들 엄마 주바다 들어가네. 입돼야 말해서. 라. 입다다 말해 가도도 말해 레레 마부 자쇼라 아니 그러면 텔레시나 기부가스 텔레 텔레시에 풍부 소부 차셔도 삼막한가 파샤 텔레 모신바 땡오 모시도 군이 배 규제를 가가 얘기 따다 발라나시 원보다 세분나시 로 근데 원보다 세분나시 따다 발라나시 뭐 가가 요네 텔레 뭐 타데시라 군이 견대와 요말 라바예바 요만나시 라바예바 시신에 요마 세번 우마로 사티네 라바예니데 뭐 타데라고 티네 신신에 풍불에 베들로가 로스치 요르스는 테요 마라 티 요나니 그 풍불에 로스 따지 요나 니 라바다 강바다 고다 트즈레가 제부터 다하게 레가 제번 두마레 그베 로가 요라 베 군이 대하게 요 마라 this is your da. Yeah,
So here then, turning back to verse 80, and this is looking for the kind of person. This is searching for the self of the person. And so it says, the person is not earth, not water, not fire, not wind, not space, not consciousness, not all of them together. What person is there other than these? So here, when we are looking for the person, like looking for this I mean, we have to recognize we have this feeling of I as like an independent kind of an entity. It's like this I that sort of has control over our various aggregates, that is somehow like the controller of those, or it has some kind of existence that seems to be in and of itself, like in its own right. But the I does not appear to us as something that is merely designated by mind upon a collection of parts and causes and conditions and so forth. And if we engage in a kind of investigation, looking for, searching for that self within its basis of designation, if it were to exist in the way that it appears to us, in the way that we think that it does, like from its own side, we would have to be able to find it. It would have to be something that was able to sort of bear scrutiny and analysis. So when we look through the various kinds of again, the various parts that constitute this thing that we call the eye, it's not as though we can find it. Like if we look through our form, going all the way from the bottom of our feet up to the top of the crown of our head, looking through our skin and our muscles and our bones and so forth, there's nothing that you can point to that exists as it appears. It exists as that eye that has that kind of independent, autonomous existence. And it's also not the case that there is this sort of self totally separate and apart from the aggregates, kind of like yellow and blue, or an ox and a cow that are entirely different and and have their own kind of essence or nature. So here, this looking through, this kind of examining our looking at the basis of designation here in the context of the person being these 5 aggregates, if it were again the case that this I existed in the way that it appeared to us, as it would be something that could bear analysis, bear scrutiny. And in general, in order to exist, something doesn't need to be able to bear scrutiny or bear analysis in this way. And so when we think about the way that phenomena do exist, as we've been explaining, through the force of convention, there are so many, like look around the world, we have all kinds of different things, all kinds of different material things that we have created and so forth, various objects like planes and computers and telephones and so forth. And so when we talk about these, we are doing so in a way that is designating a thing upon a particular basis of designation, a collection of parts. But that basis of designation is not the thing itself. If we search for it within there, we can't actually find it. So whether we are talking about a computer or a plane or something, we can talk about, oh, the plane is flying, the plane is landing. But if we try to find, well, where is the plane? What is it exactly that is that plane within that basis of designation? There's nothing that we can point to going through all of the various parts and so forth. Like we can say, oh, the plane is broken, but the one part that isn't functioning, that is broken, that is not the plane, right? But we speak in conventional terms of the plane being broken, of not being able to function. And so really we have all of these various different components, these materials, particularly now we have these sorts of various things that we have designated, but it's not as though any of that exists from its own side. This is how phenomena appear to us, but if they existed in the way that they appear, they would have to be findable within that. So it is independence upon a collection of parts, a collection of causes and conditions that we designate. Oh yes, it is that thing, and it is able to function as such. But when we engage in analysis and investigation, we can't find that thing. So here, when we look again, going back to the scriptures, it says that for those things that are dependently originated, all actions and agents are suitable or viable. And so here, like when we look at, for example, we think about the kind of self, we have this sense of an I, and it is on the basis of these aggregates that we designate this I. But if it were to exist in the way that we think that it does, we would have to be able to find it. We could begin by looking through the various physical components of the body. And so here, like it says in this verse, the person is not earth, and not water, not fire, not wind, not space, not consciousness. Now here we're talking about the elements within the body, the kind of things that have that hard sort of structure to them are referred to as earth, and then the sort of liquid elements within our body are referred to as water, and then fire is the kind of heat that we have in the body. And so we need to have that sort of heat. If we are lacking in heat, we are not alive. We also have to be able, we are dependent upon wind, or there's the wind element in the body. We need to breathe. We also have to have space. If there aren't internal spaces within the body, and again, we're not talking about externally that sort of permanent space, but rather the kinds of cavities within the body that allow for our heart to function, our lungs to expand, and so forth. And so when it comes to all of these various elements, constituent elements that make up the body, we we don't have any, we can't point to them and say, oh, this is the self, this is the I, and so forth. And again, when we talk conventionally, as the body moves along, as we go and we take steps, we say, oh, I'm walking. But when we try to find, well, where is that person, that I that is walking? You can't actually identify something. Or you might say, meet Tashi, and you go and you shake hands with him. Well, okay, your hand touched Tashi's hand, but you say, I met Tashi. Well, is Tashi his hand? No, that's a part of him, and we designate independence upon that collection of parts. This person as Tashi, for example. And so too, we dependently designate upon this basis of designation of the person. There is consciousness as well, but it's not as though the person is that clear and knowing nature of mind, but rather, again, if we just have a collection of parts, it is on that basis of designation that we then say, oh, that is the person. And here, when it comes to this kind of mode of investigation, again, we can't have something within within the sort of body or mind as it has gone through, and it is also not the case that the person is all of them together. So as this is explained as well in Chandrakirti's Entry to the Middle Way, just the collection of something is not like you could have, for example, I mean, they used to use a chariot. We more often use like a plane or something. If you have just the collection of the parts, but they're not actually put together, we wouldn't say that that is that thing, right? It is the case that it needs to be in the proper arrangement. But then Chandrakirti adds on, well, it's not just the shape of those things. It is not the case that the thing can be identified as just kind of the arrangement or the shape either. This is another level of analysis that he adds. But it's also not the case that that the person could be something aside from that basis of designation, in the way that we have like right and left hands that are totally unrelated, or we have blue and yellow, or an ox and a cow. If it were the case that there was something entirely separate from the aggregates, we wouldn't be able to say things like, I'm sick, or I'm going here, I'm thinking that, because the I would be something that is entirely apart from, separate from those aggregates, and therefore it wouldn't be logical to say any of those things.
Oh yeah, that is so. Oh, that kansa de come to Dubala, then a Tabatam Shakures. You Rangune units and you could Yomares and Gora. Then a Tabatam Sura. Nadu Jidenji Tanya Wangi in Jesungdua. Since Jiden Tanya stood out and Topani de Sigara. Sako Togbe Wangi Shapares. Tanya be Louis Wangi Shapas. Shoot him the Togbe Tasam Sida. Tobagi Tasam Sida, Togbe Patas, someone to Gris Yomarda. Dashi Karin at Telekamba, the Kansa Karin, Teleten Paming Tagado, Titabatam, Tagal Chasha would esse, Yima in the Tagal Sibacha would Tagal Dibachora, Tobe Tassam, Shotam the Tobe Tassam days, Shotam the Tobe Wangisha would esse, Tanya Wangisha would esse, Tesondako, Chavachin get the shower, then a Tabatam Chachi Roma asset, Sigora. Oh, then Dibacha, Tati Oma de the cheaper Resha. Jaji derwa. Oh, kibu come to Dubes. Nikibu de da mad was no yard come to Dubala, then a talk about some shower with Echara. Then they did a jagan on the Raya Yomare. The Zula ten of our Tanya Tagdo, or they talk about some Simbacha would. Take a dress Uzu Jam because you rangune yone, or rangune yomar, could then a talk about some shower with Ese. Jawach and get the shower with Sura. Or Kibu come to Dubala, then a tapasura. Kibu come to Dubes. Yangda Mayans, Yangdaba Trugumare, Tondamba Trugumare, Rawani Trugumare, Rawanda Trugumare, Ranshinji Tuba Yomare Sura, Yangdaba Tuba means. Tation those or a chitawa. Tishin come near the answer. Come to Buddha Latane Tabare, Kansa, Rawanda Tuba Yomare Sua Nation, Sachu Melun Namgal Soba, come to Zoya, Rawanda Tuba Yomare Sigara. Pumbungala tene ta takwa samre ta rawa to yomar pumbu re ya rawa to ta chö ganga chibare ta le chawa na she kangbale chana ta re ro yi dong su le chana re yi de mo le chana re kare le chana chi cho ne chi ka jin chi cho ne ma do ming ta chi jang jang shi ming ta yo ma re rawa de chu ba chi 어들 내도와 대화마데 깨지더라. 기부 감정 대비해서 양다 마이스 양다 버튼다 버투바 마이스 시타와 대신도세 감르르네 네 간사데 라와도 매마도 소보데 라와도 요르베 심데 라와도 요르베서 어딘데 마르다서라 사금 슈가 메가 룽가라 소보 차셔 상마데 레레레레 라와도 투바 요마레세 된다 다라 셰바나 셰초 탐절 봐 총바자 그래 지달 켜게 다근 도시네 셰바 대신 꾼로 자르차와서데 네 돼서 대신 감내레레 양 되지 양당이도 면서 어디지 좀 하는 데로 야
So here then. Again, everything is merely designated by thought, as it has said, and here the next verse, 81, is very similar in that it says, just as the person is not real due to being a composite of 6 constituents, so each constituent is not real due to being a composite. So here, again, when we get at that all phenomena are merely designated again by names, the actual sounds that we give them, as well as thought. This negates their having that kind of autonomous, independent existence in the way that they appear to us. And we have to add the caveat that not everything that we think is established. So there is a difference there between being established by thought and actually according with the way that the sort of things function, and those things that we just think and imagine. But we also have to be satisfied with that level of being merely designated by conception or thought. If you're not satisfied and then try to go and search and find that thing, there is nothing findable there. There's no, again, self in that sense of that autonomous, independent existence. And so to a certain extent, we need to be satisfied with being merely designated by thought as being sufficient for existence. It's not existent from its own side. Here, as we establish with the person, that they don't, there's nothing that one can find within the aggregates that is that person. And so too, and here where it says, just as the person is not real, in the Tibetan, this is yang dakpa, this it could be glossed as something that so is not real. Real would be synonymous with existing from its own side, or autonomously existing by means of its own characteristics and so forth. And so too, in the way that the person is not real, is not truly existent due to being something that is designated on the composite of 6 constituents, so too each of those constituents are not independently, inherently existent by their own right. And so all phenomena are the same. This is equally applicable to all phenomena, whether we are talking about a person or we are talking about a house or something that appears pleasant or something that appears unpleasant. So it is that although they appear to have that kind of existence, they don't exist in that way. And so each constituent, the earth, water, wind, fire, and so forth, also does not have that real existence, that existence in and of itself. And so, as we've quoted before, just as you understand the person to lack such a self, understand that in relation to all phenomena, or understand all phenomena likewise.
됐어. 다때 오마들아. 계시 견이디 마셔로가. 다때 가르셔도세나. 남방아에 고네 세나 간사데라고 말했대. 손자 간사 랑문에 매버레. 담바 매버레 랑도 주바 매버레 스티셔도. 데컨데레스. 풍부 다 미인세. 풍부 아버지 다 찍 말해서 거라. 풍부가데 다 말해서 다던데 소지 풍부 초에 풍부 되신데 넘버시 풍부가데 다 말해서. 풍부 다 미인세. 풍부 요 제나 시고도 가서 랑원에 요나 다 그래서 제기와라. 풍부가부터 다 레베스나 풍부가 다 되게 요라. 풍부가데 다 레스샤라. 소보다 샘다 소하던 듯이 어때서 다 레티마다 요 말. 풍부가데 다 했으나 어디 만들어서 근데 다 망부인데 그들을 다 지려. 소고 다지 세메 다지 초아 다지 두시 다지 두시 남바시바 다지 다 메랑아래 두라. 다디 망부타 그래서. 풍부 다 미인세. 그러니까 풍부가보데 다시래. 세나 수라 다데 세나 다 풍부래 남방아르 메테서 남방에 권에 세나 전생에 권에 세나라고 말해서 전생아 가까이서는 풍부다 가사 아니부데 직 말해서 거라 직 말해서 직이나니 다데 독바 직서라 직서들 독바 직당오 직서 지어라 앞에서는 독바 직서는 그러나 직라 가리네 뒤또네 뒤또 간가 직바디로와 basura chikto na chikto be keba chikada tende ko kaga cheme wetere tokbe yudu kaga ndroya mena basura chikre deora tokbe yudu kaga ndroya yuna mine tadere deora tokba ke pena sopo se onge lu sidu lu di tokbe yudu ndu mado soa di medua tokon tokba tadere sorwa sidu 두시다 넘버십에 도저 메도와 독바 타데레 독베 유도 소소스 쳐줘야 되나 들은 독바 타데시라 티마레 티레 독바게 독바 때문에 세외관에 주시라 독바데 유래 주도사 때문에 세외관에 그런 사물을 다 티마레 티레시 직수 도제 주라 어디도 가서 들은 독바 독배 유도 소소소소 가가 뇌도는 독바 타데레 독배 유도 직도도 대도 대도 캡기도 독바 찍으려고 알아 가가 뇌면은 어디도 보자 어찌기네 저 가려서나 샤야 제나 다 풍부다 남방아 요 말에서 풍부다 가사게 다 식민대세 아니 미다바 타와다 시이네 치르바도 저래 당겨라 님도 다다 보니 찍이나 근데 풍부메다반 주로데 하고도 소본 주도래 뱀 주도래 저선 주도도 그 다된 주로메 딱 받치 부라고 있으거라 아니 때간데 시켜라 풍부가도 다이나 네 소보데 다이나 때 주도도 샘 주도도 소한 주도도 시주 근데 다데 딱 버려만 소화서 치료발 껴줘라 남벌 다딱 받게길래 그래요 말아 저는 세워나 풍부 남방을 매대 풍부다 간사게 다 찍마인데 간사 찍마인데 다 미다버 타와서 아니 미다버는데 우리 치료받을 게 줘라 두말 타와서 풍부가 여번에 다래 나요 간사실 당아요 버는데라 대 가가 줘라 소부대 다래 지 심대 다래 군입에 가가라 아니 좋아다래 너 건조다래 나제 다래 티상마 다래는 다마 무시비 차그라 다마 못하 와시그라 뭐야 남방아메데 풍부다 가사기다 찍면데 딱버 타와다 도머 타와다 어때네 겨왔던 밤에 대버 타와라서 버ken주 그래서라 뒤다 겨왔던 밤에 변에 속고를 지자외나 교황아마 되고 떠들을 질게나 떠들 속고라 단다 소소 미르르게 미 속고라 되어라 아니 다되게 대세 대되나 대조로서 차야요라 대세 던도 조라샤 다단다가 미르샤세 진짜 차야요데 내매게 속고데 단데 속고데 있게 되어요 말아 아니 나게매 속고데 리상다네 단데 속고데다고 나 니마한테 질 다데 교샤세 차야요 말아 백화가로 거기 주인집 방아제 지리질 눈에 해야 말아 됐다고 시작했죠. 이제 아니 가만해서 mam이 배치죠. 근데 풍부 때문에 양가로 와야 많이 있어라. 풍부 매워져 다 거랑 짱짱 찍고 짱짱 소볼 때지 내면 거 봐지 대용 말해서라. 풍부 매봐 매배 천이cen도 타는 것이 풍부 매게 소부 매게 다 요거 대용 말해서라. 근데 다다 풍부 신다다 되네. nga shegyo ra, dada pumbu nyi di machine that meta sing de machine sigdo. De sing de te mar ka se china chilo yung sing to sigyo marta. Dinga zo me par shana. Jaga to ba ne sing ko ge sing dong chen bu de sing dong chen bu de me par sha gre. Mi ka ge metro ya le mi chobu to ska to de. De sing ko ran ma to to che ba de re til sigyo ra. Sing da me ni ngo che ba ri de de. Sing ko ran ma bu de ra. 저기 전에 신고나 배워서는 매서더라. 어딜 시거라. 제지 되어라. 뭐 되어라. 가만둬서. 야, 그래.
Again, di dosen Dr. Pungbo de Karshon la Kyashuk tar temba me. Di dosen.
배를 집어 다던다 용구다. 나도 스파 락션에 되어라. 나데 풍불라 가션라 캐슈던 번나 setting 말에 풍부대 달라 됐던 번나 setting 말에 이거 자주라. 즉 말해서라. 뭐 setting 말했어. 다던다 디나 시주네. 풍미세 다데 풍부 말해서라. 풍미 풍불레 샌도 배뭐 타데스네 요 말해서. 텔라 풍미세 다들 풍부 때문에 생기 때문에 펠레트날이야 신도 루브나 시요 말해서라. 네 풍부들 다들 센스 때문에 요 말해서. 네 네바 가 소발할 때네 네 때문에 풍미 풍부레스메 텔라 풍미 때문에 디시바 풍대면서 디나시라 이제 가듯이도 풍부란 데베치기요 말해서라. 다들 풍부란 데베치기요 말해. 데베치기 내가 가서 뭐 집은 데베치네요 말 타데 데베치네요 말해서라. 셴나 낭den스도 세진리아 방하던 데버레스나 세진리아 못하던 데버레스나 못하더라. 세진리아 고던 데버레 수던 데버레스 뭐 집은 데버치고라. 어디 뭐진 데버들 니 쳐셔요라. 그래서 내가 그래서 어디 지주산
Yeah. Okay, so then here in verse 82, we get into refuting an inherently existent person by way of the five sort of modes of analysis. And so this reads, the aggregates are not the self, nor do they exist in the self, nor is the self in the aggregates, but without them, the self cannot exist. And the self and the aggregates are not mixed like fire and fuel. Therefore, how could the self exist? So here we'll go through these this five-fold analysis, beginning with the first assertion that the aggregates are not the self. So there are those who would assert that the aggregates are the self. Now here, the first problem that would arise with that is that the aggregates are multiple, whereas we have a single kind of a self. So would you then have multiple selves? Because things like form, feeling, our discrimination, consciousness, and karmic formations, these are not the same one thing, right? So here, if we assert that the self is the aggregate, then the self, we would have the problem that the self would become multiple. Now here, when we search for the self in these five ways, looking at the commentary by Gyaltsab as well, the self and the aggregates are not one, because first it would follow that the self would therefore become impermanent. So here, this is something that again is refuting the idea of some non-Buddhists, particularly that would assert that there is a permanent, unitary, autonomous self. And it is clear that our aggregates are impermanent. So if the self is the same as the aggregates, then the self would become impermanent, would have to be impermanent. And so too, when it comes to this, like understanding it as if the self were the aggregates, so too it would follow that the self would become multiple. And again, this is important when we look at it in terms of something being a single conceptual isolate. Here is how I'm going to translate that. So when it comes to how we think about things, and this word dokpa is really like the opposite of something, the opposite of its opposite, and so that there is only a single conceptual isolate. So when we think about like if we think form, there's no way that consciousness can arise in our mind. That thing is a single sort of conceptual isolate. There's nothing else that can arise, and so it cannot be the case that the self and our aggregates are of a single conceptual isolate. We again, going to the other sort of faults that have arisen here, if it were the case that the aggregates were the self would become impermanent, and that is a problematic assertion as well. The self would become multiple, and it would also, as it explains here, there would be the fault that it would not be reasonable to remember past lives. So again, if it were the case that the aggregates of this life were the I, were the self, then we couldn't remember, say if in a past life we had been born as an animal, like a horse or something, to have any sort of memory of that body as a horse, in the case that we are now in this form as a human, there's been a cutting of that continuity. There can't be within a single sort of continuum of form that one we have changed from the kind of form that we had in a previous life to the form that we have now, and so you wouldn't be able to recall those other lives in which you had a different sort of a form. And so then a little bit skipping ahead is recognizing that here, and we'll get to the sections on, nor do they exist in the self. So the aggregates don't exist in the self, nor is the self in the aggregates. So this way of looking at them is support and supported, but we're going to skip ahead to, and the self and the aggregates are not mixed like fire and fuel. So here it really says like fire and wood, but we need to think about it in that context when, like in India or something, they're burning a big piece of wood such that that wood is really like on fire. It seems like the wood, the fire and the fuel are kind of mixed together such that when the fuel runs out, the fire will run out as well. And this is not the way in which our aggregates and self exist, like sort of mixed together in this way that the self is almost something ineffable. We can't describe it, but is mixed with that self. That is not the way in which these appear, and nor too does it have again this sort of relationship of either possession or support. It's not as though the self is somehow the support for the aggregates, or the aggregates are the support for the self, in the way that you would have like a plate that is supporting fruit, that they are of somehow different essences but have that kind of relationship. And nor is there a kind of relationship of possession, and the kind of relationship of possession can be one where they're of the same nature or of a different nature. Like when we say, oh, Devadatta has a cow, or Devadatta has a car, that's something that is separate, apart, different from him, and this indicates this kind of possession or ownership, as opposed to, oh, Devadatta has a hand, or Devadatta has a head, where it's part of the same essence. The self and the aggregates do not have such a relationship of either this supported and supporter and supported, or possessor and possessed thing, in either of those, whether it's of the same essence or a different essence.
Oh yeah. That gives you some data, Sholoka. So take our sigdosina. And Junga some Satan chick mind is that such a melon Junga she ora. Tina and Sadabu chick is ora. Junga Shanda chu me long da chick mares ora. Jungsum sa me so the some means. Junga some bute 사단 사이 중에다 찍마레스 거라 지금 있는 경 가려서는 네 사주 멜롱이 자지 자와 참마도 찍버려도라 사게네 색발치하다 요아르체발서 봐 뜻을 누구 자와다 매 자와다 추이 자와서 봐 감각 찍버린 차도라 살아 상도구라 중앙 좀 사다 찍마레스 그래서는 찍이나 살란 중앙 숨기 천이 참마 타완도 레시가 타완도 레시 아니 천이 참마 제도레 사시면로 사시 태바세 양시 요와세로 사시 색바세로 요라 조역이 차다 계속 간가 사치불이야 요가 타그레시거라 진짜도 좀 삼미 딜라 미세더라다 사치면서 산딜라 중앙숨 장신지 주베스 때마야 말해서라 아니 숨부텔라 숨부 딜라 템바밀라세 산딜라 중앙숨 템바 말이 중앙숨 데 살아파 장신 주베스 템바 마이세 숨부텔라 네가 숨부텔라 데 템바밀라 사디수 템바야 말해서 숨부테다 매버야 사디 네바 마이세 다든다 던전 시르 지셰도 직 마이세 던전 시셰서 숨부테다 매버야 사네 두고 말했지 중앙 남자 추제세 네 다신도 준비해서라 템바두바 말해서 중앙시 단데 추지 담으셔도 또 담아도 가서도 추지 담으셔 출러 속바래야 대신도 남바 시르잖아 매니 베세 다 사디 단다 중앙신 숨부터다 찍 말해서 찍셔서 디나신 중앙 상말의 시시 셰요래 대신에는 랑신지 모두가 두고래서요라 그래서 중앙 남자 추천해서 다신도 다다 찍고 충분하네 준비 임바타서 템바 두고 말해 준비 두고 그래 템바 두고 말해서 이 출러서 과래래 대신도 남바 시르잖아 매니 베쳐서 어다 진짜도 된다 그래서래 중앙선부대 사마레스 따대 지차로 티나시 아니야 사디 추디 중앙시한테 말해서 매대 중앙시한테 말해 되게 충분히 시시잖아 네 랑신지 마두바 랑신지 마두바 두비와라 근데도 중삼매야
So then, turning next to verse 83, and this is going into the explanation of the selflessness of phenomena. Here, beginning with looking at the various elements. And so here, this is first establishing that they are not inherently existent as either one or many. So the other three elements are not earth, nor are they in earth, nor is the earth in them, but without them the earth cannot exist. Such is also the case for each of the other elements. Therefore, as with the self, the elements are unreal. And so here, it is not the case that the three other elements, as in water, fire, and wind, are earth. They are not the same. If it were the case that all of the other three elements were the same as earth, then it would follow that earth would be complete with the kind of characteristics of those other elements. And so obviously that is not the case. Earth has the ability to, again, be sort of have hardness and support. And wind has that sort of motility, and water has that cohesion, and fire has that ripening heat kind of element, nature. Its nature is characterized by being hot and burning and so forth. And so all of the kind of functions or characteristics of the other elements would have to apply to Earth, but that is not the case. That is not how these exist. And so too, it isn't the case that the earth element is like the support for the other elements, nor is it the case that the earth exists supported by the other elements, nor is the earth in those other elements. So again, there is no sort of relationship of being the support and the supported between an inherently existent earth and the inherently existent other elements. And then nor is it the case that Earth could exist without those other elements. They are interdependent. So here there are four modes of investigation and analysis that lead us to an understanding that the subject, these elements, it follows that they are like the self, and here that's referring to the self of persons, because again, we've moved to talking about the selflessness of phenomena, that like that self of persons they are false, because when it comes to finding each of these through the four sort of methods of analysis that were presented above, each of them, water and so forth, can't be found. There isn't any inherently existing earth element or any of the other elements. So it's not as though they exist inherently as one thing or in this kind of inherent relationship of support and supported, but nor is it the case that each one can exist independently, inherently separate from the others. And so therefore, like the self of the persons, one should recognize them as being false, as not being established as inherently existent.
뭐야? 또 겹시더라. 근데 가서도 강손 매발 레레 매스다 중앙손 되시거라. 지금이 봐야 손 매도서. 대나산 중앙은 랑신지 매대서 중앙 레레레레 전에 랑신지 주바요 말에 와 사슈 멜로남 손 매발에로 매 손데 매네 레레 짱발리네 도 말에서라. 에네 지금이 봐야 되나네 주에 신나네 지금에네 샹다 손부대네 도 말에서 다 속바 사토도로 지나 있네 티강가 중앙 시가디 시가라. 다 되는 거지. 야, 근데 찍매 봐야 숨매배 소리세. 어디 봐도 어디래. 숨매 반에 레르벤 중앙 숨가 매나 랑신 지투바 매나 레르네 랑신 투바 용 말에 중앙 찍 랑신 지투바 매나 숨가 랑신 투바 용 말에 서르치. 뒤지 셰도 숨매 반에 레르메 찍매 반에 숨매도 어디 줄었나.
So then turning to verse 84, it then reads, earth, water, fire, and wind are each not inherently existent, since each one does not exist without the other three, and the other three do not exist without each one. So here, therefore, this is establishing that the elements, earth and so forth, are not inherently existent, as it has explained here, that each of them is not established by means of their own essence or their own nature. And so here, as it is the case, whatever of these various elements, earth, water, fire, wind, when one does not exist, or sorry, when each of them is established to not be existent by means of its own nature, own characteristics, it's not the case. So earth, water, fire, and wind, without the other three, like they can't exist individually as individuals. And if one is not existent as an inherently existent individual, then it cannot be the case that there are all three existent as inherently existent individuals. So here again, since each one does not exist without the other three, in the absence of the others, one can't have a sort of solitary, isolated, independent existence, then the other three do not exist without each one. So since that is the case, that they can't individually exist as a single one, that then so even in, like, say, a clump of earth, all four elements are present within that.
뭐야 다들. 다 자주 장하더라. 중앙 두바랑 시지 매버 두고도. 중앙 두바. tene kasida. Kete sum me rere me se junga sumbu de rashi me na ne rere wate rashi umare se. Chik me pare tena chik rashi jituba me na sumbu de rashi jituba umare se. Soso yoba maye de junga soso rashi jituba yomare, junga sun deba de rashi jituba yomare se. Soso rashi soso yoba maye de chidan deba kebar yoso. Soso rashi yoba me balya deba de junga sum junga shila soban deba de rashi jituba kala yonde yungmare se ro. Ya tele silana. Bis.
So then turning to 85, verse 85, this is then establishing that because of the fact that these are contingent, are dependent, the aggregation of these various elements is also not inherently established. That because they are dependent or contingent, that is in direct opposition to their having some kind of inherent establishment. And so it reads then in 85, that if each one does not exist without the other three, and the other three do not exist without each one, then they individually do not essentially exist. So how could they arise as a compound? So here, if the individual elements don't have inherent existence, then it's impossible for there to be a compound of them, or a derivative from them, something that is compounded of those elements that has that kind of inherent existence, since it is the case that they individually lack that sort of essential existence or inherent existence.
Oh yeah. Tandere da kasere. Gyatu dira. O de karshe do sene kachi tsoba chiku do. Tele le do. Soso range ngoye ye be se deba rangshin ji do. Juan deba de rangshin ji do yo re se ka tena yonge juan re de rangshin ji be cher se do. Ngo ma zo su lab ge wara she na se. Ta tele pa len ja do. O ne len kar ja do sene. Juan sum ji dani chen ji pyushin me bara. Wende soso rang yo na pyushin me bara mechi me se. Juan soso rang shi ji tuba yo na ne menda ji tang yo na ko me shing de pyushin de me na ya ne me yo chogre so soso rang shi yo na me ko rang shi yo chora. Rang shi yo na ne pyushin le ten ko ya ke yo ma re se go ra. O ke de soso rang yo na pyushin me bara pyushin me bara mechi me se pyushin me na me yo chogre. Pyushin se de pe bar dengenge me dang o chi che denge chi wara o tele sig do. Ani yo dan to dan de ba dan shu dan me dan long de shi o de na shi yo ha long dan ro to ba sa dan de ba che ba chu dan o te zu thama rang shin ji yo ba ma re so ra. So so rang shin ji yo ba ma yin de ba rang shin ji yo ma re se. Ani sa chu me no de re wa rang shin ji yo ma re te so za so ba de rang shin ji yo ma re se te tu da ya. Tende.
So here, then it also is refuting an idea that is brought by the kind of realists that would say that there is an inherently existent kind of aggregation or compound of these various elements because they each individually exist inherently in their own right. And so here, as it says then in 86, this is kind of a rejoinder that is put forth by the opponent where they say, if each element exists on its own, then why wouldn't fire occur without fuel? Likewise, why wouldn't there be water, wind, and earth without coherence, motility, and hardness? So here, again, if it is the case that each of these elements exists like inherently in and of its own right, then it should be the case that you could have, for example, fire without fuel, without the kind of basis upon which it is consuming or is, acting as fire, that you could have a fire in the absence of those characteristics of it being hot and burning and so forth. And so too, if that were the case, that there is this kind of inherently existent fire that exists on its own, again, then you would have to have the occurrence of, say, fire without fuel. And likewise, there would have to be water without coherence, wind without motility, and earth without hardness. These things would have to exist in and of themselves, actually even independent of their kind of characteristics or functions.
Oh, yeah, that is just awesome.
Oh.
Yeah.
So we will stop there for today as we are out of time.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Rinpoche. You've given us a lot to think about. And thank you, Katrina, for your beautiful translation. Just a reminder, we're meeting next Tuesday instead of Monday at 9 a.m. Pacific. And with just 2 weeks left of these teachings for this series, there's information in the chat box about offerings of gratitude. So we'll finish with some dedications.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it, have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Lobsang's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. In the snowy mountain pure land, you're the source of good and happiness. Powerful Tenzin Gyatso Chinrezi, may you stay until samsara ends.
Oh, yeah. Good.
도체낭이야.
Oh, yeah. Oh, this.
Recording stop.